Welcome everybody to Carols We Love to Sing. We've made you these videos to bring some Christmas cheer because we all need it, don't we? We've noticed there are so many people in Angmering who are doing their bit for the village, and this is just our little contribution. Together we've been through such a lot in 2020 and we've learned to do things in so many new ways. I mean, who had ever heard of a Zoom meeting back in 2020, before 2020?
We've found some lovely feel-good stories of Angmering life, both past and present. And we've got a cracker of a story for you today, one that made the press back in the 1860s.
We've had such a laugh making these videos, both the bits that we got right and the bits like this that went a bit wrong.
Do you know, I've forgotten the question, Jerry. I love it.
So what we've got for you is a whole mix. We've got you some of the stories behind the carols that we love to sing. I think you're going to be fascinated with those. Today we're looking at a carol and we owe it to an Irish bishop and a professional Morris dancer. It's true, you've got to keep watching.
As we started filming, one thing that was clear to us all is that we want company, especially at Christmas time.
Just being with all the family and singing Christmas carols and playing games. When we were all, my brother and sisters and my mum and dad and my aunt, we used to have big family get-togethers with the fire going, putting logs on, chestnuts, and just sing and play games.
Well, I normally look forward to going to stay with my daughter, but she's in New Zealand this year, so unfortunately Christmas is going to be a no-no for me, I'm afraid, because I'm on my own.
Stay safe, stay well, and hopefully be with your family, and get the Christmas decorations up and the Christmas tree. And
I think for us it's to do with family, and we personally love church. You know, that's like the real centre of it for us. Very much so, because it is the reason for Christmas, isn't it?
Yeah. Obviously this year is not going to be so easy with some of that, but the message is still the same. So yeah, it is seeing family, spending time with them.
I'm not feeling Christmassy yet, but I will do, and I look forward to it very, very much. Seeing family, church services, on Christmas Eve, having a lovely carol sing on the green, which perhaps we won't be able to do this year, but people will remember it, I'm sure.
Yeah, and "O Come All Ye Faithful," that's another one. Still just at Christmas, you know, makes you a bit emotional.
The words especially, they resonate with everybody, I think.
We want to celebrate together and we're just not sure how that's going to be able to happen this year.
No wonder that Christmas carols, singing them, being with others, for a long time that's been a part of the joy of Christmas.
You know, personally for me, singing carols, they give me a real connection with the people of the past. So I really love the atmosphere, the simple atmosphere of a candlelit bare stone church. It makes me think of all the generations of people that stood in that exact same place singing the exact same words, and I know that they found hope and comfort and joy in the words, and that really touches me.
So we're going to look briefly at what they were singing, the story of the carol itself, what it's telling us.
This episode is about the carol that's simply called the Sussex Carol.
And we've got the fascinating story of how our own county got its very own carol.
The words are not so well known, but they deserve to be, so we're going to take a brief look at those as well. So the words of the Sussex Carol were first published in 1684 by Luke Wadding, who was an Irish bishop. But his book was published and printed in Belgium.
So the Irish and the Belgians could both lay claim that they had the carol first. So how did Sussex get in there?
Well, if we fast forward to 1905 and to Oxford University, there was a small group of students calling themselves the Folk Music Society, and they dedicated themselves to collecting folk songs, songs that had been passed down as one generation sung them to the next generation. So these students travelled up and down the country collecting songs, fearing that otherwise they might one day be lost forever unless the songs were actually written down somewhere. One of these collectors was called George Butterworth, and he lived a short but very full life. George's dad ran a railway company, and George himself was sent off to Eton and then to Oxford, where he managed to just about scrape a degree. But his passion was for folk song and also for dancing. You've guessed it, he once described himself as a professional Morris dancer. So in the spring of 1907, Butterworth collected our carol in Horsham, where it was sung to him by someone called George Knight. Now, before long, Butterworth was serving in the war. He was awarded the Military Cross, but he died in the Battle of the Somme, aged just 31. And he left his collection of songs to his friend and fellow enthusiast, Ralph Vaughan Williams, whose name is very familiar to us today.
The carol must have been widely sung at the time because another group collected it in Gloucestershire. But the claim for Sussex gets stronger, doesn't it?
You're quite right, Ben. Ralph Vaughan Williams was wandering through Sussex asking people to sing songs for him, and more than one gave him our carol, which he jotted down in his notebook. He got one version from Billingshurst, and a similar version came from a Mr. and Mrs. Verrill. The Verrills, Peter and Harriet, lived in the small village of Monksgate, later on moving to Horsham. Of the two of them, it seems like Harriet knew the most songs, and Vaughan Williams collected many songs from her. But Peter was also a singer, and the Verrills apparently took pleasure in singing to each other in the evenings by the fireside. I think that sounds really cosy.
Sounds great.
And their son can remember Vaughan Williams coming to their house with a phonograph machine to record their songs. Now, although the Verrills ended their lives in Horsham, they're going to be remembered as the singers from Monksgate, mainly because Vaughan Williams had a habit of naming hymn tunes after the villages where he collected them. So we've got you one more Christmas cracker of a story. This time it's from Angmering in the past, and of course if you want to know about Angmering village life in the past, Neil Rogers-Davies is your man. So here is an interview that he kindly did with us. Please will you bear with me, because it's the first video that I learned to edit, and we did say we were all learning new things, new skills in 2020. So please will you ignore my clumsy editing and just instead be fascinated with what Neil had to say.
Most of Angmering people were fairly poor. You know, you've got a good high proportion of the population, and they couldn't afford things. You didn't have, the turkeys were coming in for sort of the more well-off people. But the best that the poorer families could afford was probably a goose. Now, if they were slightly more wealthy, they may have a bit of beef, but a lot of them, they just probably survived on a sort of a rabbit. So very, very little at that time. And anything, I would imagine that children particularly, when they were offered something, when they saw, you know, they were given a treat, then it really probably meant a lot to them.
I think you've looked back at some of the records, haven't you, and seen the sort of treats that the children might have enjoyed. Have you got a snippet that you can...
A couple of snippets here from the West Sussex Gazette going back into the 1860s.
Can you read them to us?
Yes, certainly. One of the things was that the Squire of Ham Manor, William Gratwick, he did provide an annual treat to the children from the free school, as it was said, or sometimes called the endowed school, but this was basically William Alder's charity school, which is now the library. And the report it was the 9th of January 1862, said Mr. Gratwick gave his annual treat to the children of the free school on Wednesday last in January, when upwards of 150 children sat down to an excellent dinner of boiled beef, plum pudding, etc., which, it need not be said, was partaken with much satisfaction. Then it went on to say that all enjoyed themselves heartily. Unfortunately, at the end of that year, William Gratwick died, but his brother-in-law, the William Pierce, decided that he was going to try and carry on the tradition, which he did, and provided this Christmas feast again for this number of children, which he said, which consisted of roast and boiled beef, well, at least got roast beef this time. They had boiled beef before, and plum puddings. In addition to which, there was a very handsome Christmas tree loaded with useful articles, toys and sweets. After dinner, our worthy rector, the Reverend H. Reeks, addressed the children upon the propriety of constant attendance and dutiful conduct at school, directed attention to the very efficient manner with which the children had acquitted themselves, both in their songs and in speeches. And it finishes up, after the Christmas tree had been stripped, the national anthem was sung. So that gives you a little insight. We don't have a lot to know about Christmas at the time. It's only through these few snippets that we can find out how things really were at the time.
That's really interesting how some of it sounds the same and some of it sounds different. Getting the kids together to do some singing and acquitting themselves well in a speech. That sounds quite stressful. Mm-hmm. But then I'm really fascinated by this idea that there was a tree laden with toys, sweets and useful articles, whatever a useful article might be. And then did you say that it said that the children then had the chance to strip the tree of all the good things that were on it?
Well, yes, when we talk about stripping, it may not be as actually a free-for-all, because I'm sure that all the elders of the village were there standing over, and of course there's probably a lot of discipline at the time. It meant taking things off the tree, I think, which is probably the more literal translation of that. And where the tree would have been, how big the tree was, or where it was situated, whether it was indoors, whether it was outdoors, we don't know.
So what did you think of that?
I thought it was great. Such a feel-good story. Imagine the joy of those kids with a beef dinner inside them, tummies full of pudding, all their friends. And the story got into the local paper. That's the kind of story we love to read.
I just thought that was amazing, seeing our village, Angmering, making the news in the West Sussex Gazette. It was only 4 pages of it and it made the newspaper. I can just imagine the kids saying, "Hey Dad, can we move to Angmering? I could do me with some of that plum pudding." And those sweets on the Christmas tree, they've got those in Angmering. A tree full of sweets and toys.
And imagine all those kids, 150 of them. I thought we had a lot at 4.
Yeah, I wonder where you put them all. And so I asked Neil about that.
150 children. Would that have been the whole school that this feast was of boiled beef and plum puddings was provided for?
Well, that was the suggestion, that the free school and 150 children, but I don't think there were 150 children at the school. It may be that there was some younger brothers and sisters were allowed along, and it was, where would you actually house all these people to sit down and have a dinner? What sort of places would there be? Would it be William Gratwick's ham manor? I doubt it. You'd want all the ragamuffins of the village going down to his property, so I doubt it. Which left I suppose it was the church, but I don't think in those days the church would have been used for that type of thing. Certainly, going back hundreds of years, it was a communal meeting place, the church, but I'm not sure in the Victorian times. I think it was more strict, but I don't know. The other place, which is a distinct possibility, is the Lamb pub in the square. Now, the Lamb was run by Thomas Wilkinson, known as Old Wilkie. Now, Old Wilkie was known throughout Sussex as a mass caterer, and he catered sometimes for 2,000 to 3,000 people at very large events, maybe in Victorian times. Certainly, there are a lot of events that took place in the village, all the feasting, the meeting of all the elders and the magnates of Angmering were held in the upstairs room in the Lamb. Now, the upstairs room, of course, they've got bedrooms up there now, but this was one very large space. So whether that was spread in that time and they squeezed them all in, that's something, but it never said where it was. But certainly Thomas Wilkinson, or Wilkie, would have had the experience and the facilities to be able to cook for all these kids.
That is fascinating, and we might never know for sure, but that is good sleuthing there. I'm really
Well, I
fascinated.
can't think of anywhere else that it could be.
Neil, thank you so much for joining me to give us a bit of an insight into Christmas in the village in years past. And can I finish by asking, in your household, will you be enjoying boiled beef and plum puddings like people in times past?
Well, we're pretty traditional actually, so it always has to be turkey, largely on Christmas Day, and I'm a great lover of Christmas pudding with lashings of homemade brandy butter, which has fallen to me over the years to make. When we talk about plum pudding, one last thing is, of course, it was probably never made of plums. It was certainly going back to the 19th century, and it was actually made with raisins, and that's what they call plum pudding. It was made with raisins. And as the 19th century progressed, so came all the additional dried fruits, and reaching the Christmas pudding developed during the 19th century into largely what we know today.
Well, wherever it was, that was a fine Christmas dinner. And a great tradition for the children. It's lovely to imagine it. And they might well have been singing the Sussex Carol as part of their event.
Do you know, I think people are going to be curious to know how the Sussex Carol actually goes, because it's been bringing Christmas cheer for over a century. So shall we see what it says?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great carol. It starts off with people singing because they've heard the news of Christmas night, news of great joy, news of great mirth.
I know, I think mirth is a genius move, trying to get a cheerful word in there to rhyme with birth.
And then the carol goes on to talk about being joyful because of freedom and liberty. Verse 2 goes, "Then why should we on earth be so sad, since our Redeemer made us glad? When from our sin he set us free, all for to gain our liberty." We enjoy a lot more freedom than many people back in the past. We've got freedom to choose what work we do, freedom to choose how to express ourselves, freedom of religion, freedom to speak our own opinion.
We have got a lot more freedom, haven't we? And yet we're not a lot more happy. Mental health's such an issue. I wonder, maybe we're stressed because we've got too many options, too many decisions to make. And it's true, isn't it? People have got freedom to just be themselves, but sometimes we're just not 100% sure who that is. Who am I?
Well, the Sussex Carol reminds us of the Redeemer who came at Christmas time to give us true freedom. Jesus said these wonderful words, "Come to me, all who labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls."
Verse 3 carries on with the Christmas cheer. "When sin departs before his grace, then life and health come in its place. Angels and we with joy may sing, all for to see the newborn King."
Now, sin is not a popular word these days and often misunderstood, but it gets us right to the heart of the Christmas message. Sin is simply not allowing God to be God in our lives. It's when we live in his world and ignore him, convinced we're free to do just as we please. We all do it, and it messes things up. Of course, people use their freedom to do lots of good things too, but deep down we won't give up our freedom to please ourselves, and that ends up hurting other people. And it's so hard to be free of that. This is why Jesus was born, to set us free from our sin.
That does make sense of the carol, doesn't it, and what it's celebrating.
And it's why the Sussex Carol is so joyful.
I'm so glad it belongs to Sussex.
Absolutely, me too.
So let's hear the whole of the Sussex Carol that's been brought to us with the kind permission of the King's College Cambridge Choir. Do feel free to sing along at home, and please come and join us for another one of these videos. Thank you for watching.